Hello, folks. We're going to be talking about arrays today. This should be the fourth episode. No, actually, this is the fifth episode of the series. Yeah, we're going to be talking about arrays and what they're good for, how they work. We're probably going to do some drawing here. So basically, what is a variable? Let's start with that. So a variable, as you declare it, like let's say you're declaring an integer, you're declaring some space in memory, right? This happens to be 32 bits in most situations, and 32 bits is equal to 4 bytes. If you didn't know that, that's just something that you're gonna have to get comfortable with, kind of knowing what you're allocating. So an integer is a box, right? But let's say you had a bunch of data. Like, let's say you were having a group of numbers that you were wanting to do some math on, right? An array, all it is in memory is you're declaring an integer, but you're declaring a huge block of memory, all split up into different little boxes here. And then you can store different numbers inside, right? And obviously these numbers have quite the range, but we'll just use some simple numbers for this. But to access one of these boxes, whether to set it to a value, if we named this array, we'll just call it ARR, right? To access this array, what you're going to have to do is use these little bracket operators, right? Notice this is not parentheses, right? These aren't little curly brackets. They're the hard angle kinds. And these guys, you can select a certain number from this box. Now, although it may not seem intuitive, you're not selecting this little guy. You're not selecting the second number in the array, right? When you ask for the second element, or the array index 2, what you're actually accessing is this guy. Okay, and if we're counting up, obviously we know that we can fill in the rest, right? So let's just go back down. Awesome. So we have a 0 here, right? The reason why is because as programmers, we always count from 0. 0 is a number, and 0 just happens to be the first element in the array, right? So what does that mean? That means that this element, the last element in the array, is actually the size, we'll call it n, minus 1. So the size of this integer array, as we were to write it in memory, would be 7. Because we have 7, we allocated space for 6, but we set 7, right? And I know it seems kind of odd, but let's explain it another way. So let's say we have a declaration, int a7, right? We're declaring 7 spaces. So let's count to 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Boom. That's it. So see how we're getting 7 even though it's because we're counting from 0. And this is kind of a very important thing. Now let's kind of talk about SourceMod, right? So before I talked about int client, and this is going to be a little explanation about what client actually is. Okay? So the engine, the source engine itself, it classifies clients in kind of a unique way. So the client that we're doing these operations on are actually just indexes in an array, right? And this is an array that we don't control, we don't mess with. But each client has their own little spot in this array, right? Starting from 0, of course, 1, 2, 3, so on, so on. So int client is in an array of size 65. So that is kind of a weird number, 65 specifically. Often this is described as max players plus 1. So max players is kind of like a special variable, you can think about it as, inside of SourceMod, and that's equal to 64. So to get 65, we just add 1. Now, why do we add 1? That's kind of a different story, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But client, like we said, is actually just an index in this array somewhere, and that's how we determine whether or not, like, who we're doing things to, whether we're printing to chat, whether we're slaying them, whether we're doing other actions. It's actually just an index in an array. So that means that client is less than or equal to this number right here, 65. So we'll just write here, client I should have written 65 here. Sorry, I'm pretty sloppy right now. All right, client is in between 0 and 65, and it could be either one of these, right? It can be any one of these numbers. So what is 0? 0 is kind of like a special index. Whenever you do things to 0, you're actually doing it to the server. So the first client actually starts from 1. The 0 client is the console or server. We'll just write server. So if you were to print to chat and you were to insert 0 as the first parameter as the client index, it would actually just print to the server, and that can be useful for some things. But and the server is technically a client. It has its client index, but in terms of actual like users and people on your server, it's effectively 1. Because no human would be 0. So any client can be from 1 to 65. So we talked about max players, right? We talked about this little variable right here. Let's go ahead and talk about another variable that's kind of important to know. There's max players, and then there's also max clients. So max players is the absolute maximum player count could ever be, regardless of server settings, right? You could only have 64 players, and then you can only have one GoTV or one Source TV entity, which takes up that last spot. So that's why we have to add 1, right? Because max players alone isn't enough. We have to account for the server taking up a spot, so we just add 1 to it. Max clients actually depends on the server you're running on, because let's say it's a 12-slot server, max clients would probably be 13, right? And that's fairly important, because just because you allocate a size of max players, right? Like we want to allocate the maximum size we could ever need, right? But we want to actually use and interact with things that are in this range. So it's kind of an interesting little tidbit, so let's get into the code. So this is a very, very, very common practice, and when you're learning SourceMod, it's really important because you will be doing things that matter depending on the client itself. So we're going to declare an integer. Let's try to think of something we can do. Let's say we're going to store a number. So we're going to declare an array. This syntax you'll see sometimes in other plugins and stuff. What it means is, so if you have a global integer, you would do something like this, right? If you were doing, here, that's a global integer. So G means global, I means integer, and you just note what the type is. A means array. Something that I've seen done is this. We'll learn about convars and stuff later. That's a whole nother video, but this means global convar boolean. So those are just good things. And obviously if it's a float, you would do g underscore f sum float, right? But anyway, so we're going to do a global array of integers. That way we know what we're doing. And we're going to declare max players plus 1. So max players is, I accidentally put an underscore here. There's not an underscore. So we're going to do max players plus 1. And let's just set it equal to 0. We're going to set every element in this array equal to 0. Okay. So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to reset this value every time a new player joins, because just because client is in this array doesn't mean that they own that spot forever, right? So let's say someone connects to client index 2, and then that index leaves and that person goes away. A new person will come in and then take the second spot. So when we notice that 2 leaves, before it gets reassigned, we're gonna reset the variables. I hope that makes sense, because we'll be using the client index from 1 to 65, which we know it's gonna belong in, and we are going to hold our own array with our own information and use that index, and use their client index to save things based on who they are. So we're going to have to create a function, reset variables, and we're going to pass the client. So this guy should set global array I number client equal to 0, because we're gonna reset it, and we're going to do that when they join and when they leave. So how do we hook when they join? Let's find out. On client connected. This is called after the client connects and they are in the game. Or sorry, once a full connection is made. There's also another one, on client put in server. This happens a little bit later. I tend to like using this a little more. So we're going to do global number. We're going to set that person's number to 0. But since we made a function to do that already, we're just going to reset variables client. Awesome. And the reason why we made a function to do this is that if we were to create more of these, all we have to do is edit one spot, because as you'll notice, we're going to make 2. So we have to reset it when they leave, and then we should also set it when they, we have to set it when they join. We also have to set it when they leave, just to make sure absolutely that their variable is reset when they leave and another person joins. So on client disconnected, on client disconnect int client, and we're going to call the same thing, reset variables. Now the reason this is good is because we have no code duplication, right? If we were to put this here and we were to put this here and then pretend we didn't have that function, what are we doing? We have code that does the same thing, the same purpose. This is bad. You always want to try to combine everything so there's a very nice code flow and nothing is duplicated. The second you see yourself putting the same thing a bunch of times, you need to stop and think about how to do it a little bit better. And if you don't know, feel free to leave a comment and ask. So we're going to use these functions here. So cool. So we're resetting their number when they leave. Let's go ahead and register a console command. We're going to call it smset command set. Description sets your number. Awesome. So now what we're going to do, we're going to declare that callback, public action command set. You guys have seen this before. We have our client and we have our args, our arguments. So now what we're going to do is, there we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do some checks here. So if args is not equal 1, we're going to reply to command. We're going to reply to that client, and we're going to say sm usage sm set. And that is it. And then we're going to return plugin handled, of course. That way we stop the function call. Cool, so at this point, any code below here, we know that they're arguments. We know that the arguments is 1. So now we can declare an array. So we're going to declare an array, arg1, and we'll just declare it as 32, 33, whatever. And then we're going to get command arg. We're going to get the first one. And then we are going to get the, then we're going to store it in the string. Awesome. The same thing that we've done previously. We're going to create an integer, call it the number, string to int arg1. Awesome. So we've just saved the number that they typed with that command. We're gonna go ahead and save this number by using their client index equal to num, and then we're gonna output to them that we saved it, because we don't want them to be left hanging. We want to make sure that they know that we saved it. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna apply to command client. We're gonna say number was successfully set. And then let's go ahead and give them that number back. Whoops. So then of course we're gonna return plugin handled. Awesome, so they can set their number. Let's go ahead and show a way to get that number. So we're gonna do the same thing. Instead of command.set, whoops. Instead of command.set, we're going to do command.get. And then we're going to do something very similar here. And of course, this is going to be called command.get, or command get. And we're just going to do some copy pasting here to make our lives a little easier. So if command arguments does not equal 0, oh, whoops, I just noticed a mistake. There's supposed to be an argument there. So if args does not equal 0, then we're just going to say, hey, you're supposed to just get this. That's it. There's nothing that you don't have to give us a parameter. All right. And now they asked for it, so we're going to go ahead and give it back. So we're going to do reply to command client sm. I'm going to say your number is, and we're going to give them that number back, which is this array. Perfect. And here what we're doing, we're just accessing their number specifically. We could store this in an integer if this makes it a little easier for you guys, but they're equivalent. And that's it. Let's see if I made any mistakes. I did, because this is supposed to return plugin handled, of course. As you notice, I mistaked that a lot. Awesome. So this right here is how to set client data. This could be anything. It could be their Steam ID. It could be information regarding whether or not a certain thing's happening that we need to keep track of. But this is a very important technique to learn, and it's super common. You guys will see it everywhere. And if you have any questions about the syntax or anything about this, let me know. But yeah, so this is how to save client data. I hope you guys have a good one. Thanks for watching.